I am feel. I'm very feel. I'm very feel.
Hi guys, welcome to the Superfly Boxing Podcast. I'm Taylor Higgins, your host, and I'm joined by the fantastic Russ Anber, founder of Rival Boxing Gloves, amateur and pro coach extraordinaire, and please correct me if I'm wrong, current trainer of Alexander Usyk, arguably the pound for pound top fighter in the sport.
Well, I can't take credit for that, Taylor, but thank you for that fine introduction. Now that he's training in the Ukraine, I'm not involved in the training now until we go to training camp. So as much as I'd like to take credit for being the trainer, it would be unfair of me to do so. But when he was here stateside, when we were in California for training camp, I was his trainer, and I was the trainer in the corner for him for many of his fights, including the Michael Hunter fight in the States when he defended his title against Michael Hunter before the Super Series started. So yeah, he's a great guy.
Yeah, no, I have some questions lined up about Usyk and Lomachenko in due course. But first of all, I'd love to hear, how did you get started in boxing? What was was there a particular event, or what sparked this passion and really got you into the sport and considering it as a career?
I think, those are probably three separate questions, but I'll try to summarize it as best I could and put together, over 40 years in the game in a short answer as possible. I think my first contact with boxing came when I was 10 years old, and the Ali Fraser fight was getting set to take place. And unless you've lived it, in my 40 years, I've never come across another event like that in the magnitude that it was. And this went beyond the sports pages. It went beyond boxing. This was global. This was as much political and newsworthy as it was sports-worthy, and not to mention the unbelievable sum of money that they were being paid at the time. An unheard of amount. So really, this sparked my interest as a young boy. And, I was always a sports fan, loved sports. And, now, wow, there's boxing and, Ali and Fraser. And so this was big. So that was my first real contact with the sport, so to say, from as a child. I think the thing that kind of plotted my course in life was the '76 Olympics. And the reason being is those Olympics were held here in Montreal, in my hometown. So, we were surrounded with Olympic fever and all the events that led up to the Olympic Games, including a radio station here at the time, was a top 40 radio station, played all the hits all the time, called CKGM. And they were holding Olympic breakfasts. And they would have they were doing live broadcasts from a hotel ballroom where you could go and be there for breakfast, meet different athletes who were going to be participating in the games once the games got started. And I went to one, and I had a chance to meet Ian Clyde. And Ian Clyde was Canada's flyweight boxer at the time, and a kid from here in Montreal. And I got an autograph of him, and I am sure I have that picture still in my possession somewhere among my memorabilia that I could dig out. So I met Ian, and Ian and I eventually became very good friends. But at the time, I was a young kid, 15 years old, and this guy was going to the Olympics. He was like a hero. Well, coupled with that, once the game started, and getting a chance to see the American team on American television, showing all their fights and the success they were having, which included the likes of, Sugar Ray Leonard, Howard Davis Jr., Leo Randolph, the Spinks brothers. This was just phenomenal to watch this, and watch the Cubans as well, and the great Teofilo Stevenson, getting to see these fighters and listen to the commentary of Howard Cosell at the time. All those things coupled together, and finally the release of the Rocky movie in November of that year of '76, I think sealed my fate and made me fall in love with boxing. And it's been, I was bitten with the bug, and I've been an addict ever since.
That's absolutely fantastic, and what an experience to watch the likes of Sugar Ray Leonard in your hometown. I'm extremely envious. We're getting to watch Sugar Ray in his 1976 run. So, in terms of getting to actual to coaching and training, so I'm aware of your amateur career as an amateur coach of the likes of Howard Grant, Otis Grant, and the likes. So how actually did you get into that? Did you have an amateur boxing career yourself, or did you know you want to be a coach from the start?
Well, I knew I think when I look back on it, I didn't know then, but when I look back on it now, I see that I always had a desire to be a coach of some sort, whether it was going to be baseball or hockey. I felt this was something that I was going to do. So it was something that was within me, but I started out as a boxer, going to a gym when I graduated high school, going to a boxing gym here in Montreal, and I went to the gym thinking that I'm going to compete now. I had a couple of fights as an amateur already. Now I was coming into Montreal, and I knew this was going to be an opportunity for me to be in a real boxing gym with real fighters. This was going to be a massive chance now to meet some real fighters. And so I went to the gym, and I saw what was there. I saw for the first time in my life what a real boxing gym was, and that was the Olympic Boxing Club on Park Avenue, which, if I had to, make an equivalent of that, that was the equivalent in Canada to what the Kronk gym was in the U.S. All this was the powerhouse of boxing gyms in Canada. Here I walk in there, and wow, look at this place. And then I also realized that, talent-wise, I was far removed from, ever hoping to have any kind of success, in boxing. First of all, getting such a late start, and just not having the physical attributes or the talent that these fighters had, and I said, wow, this is another world, right? Like I've stepped into a new dimension here. But I continued to train there and work out and spar. And one day I'm at the gym, and I recognized one of the pros training there, but I couldn't remember his name. And I'm looking at him and I say, I know that guy, I know that face. I've seen that face in the boxing magazines. So I went back home that night and, looked through my magazines looking for where I had seen a flash of this picture of this guy. And I found it, and it was Vinny Curto. And Vinny Curto was a world-ranked middleweight from Boston who was now training in Montreal, fighting in Montreal. And I said, I knew that guy. And he was a great fighter. Like, you could see the difference between him and all the other pros in the gym. There was just something a little bit better about him, a little bit more refined, a little bit more talent. I mean, he was just brilliant to watch. I said, look at this guy, he's great. So I go to the gym the next day, and when he finished his training, I just walked up to him and I said, excuse me, I said, are you Vinny Curto? And he said, yes, I am. I said, man, I've seen your pictures in the magazines and I read about you. I said, you're a great fighter. I love watching you work here. And so he said, oh, that's very nice of you. And then I don't know what came upon me, but I just said to him, do you do road work in the morning? And to which, of course, he said, yes, he does. I said, would you mind if I joined you on one of your runs? He said, nah. He says, we'll go tomorrow. I said, oh, that's great. So I started doing road work with him, and we'd finish our road work and then I'd say goodbye and go home. And then it went from doing our road work to going for breakfast after road work to then going home. And then it became doing our road work, having breakfast, hanging out all day talking about boxing, and going to the gym. And then it became road work, breakfast, talking about boxing all day, going to the gym, watching his training, and then talking about it after training, and then going home. So, I mean, we just started hanging out together, almost 24 hours a day talking boxing, to the point where, I was the one making coaching observations. So now I by this point, I had stopped training, and I had become, felt like it was important for me to be a trainer. And I had a towel, and I put Vaseline on him, and I would tie him up, and I'd put his headgear on, lace up his gloves and put his headgear on and wash his mouthpiece out. And, when I'd get a chance, I'd make some coaching observations, and he would say things to me that, you got more sense and more knowledge about boxing than any of these guys in here, and oh boy, when you're 18 years old and somebody like Vinny Curto says something like that to you, you can imagine what that does for your ego. So that was basically so that was basically how I started in the coaching career. And to this day, whenever I give credit to somebody for the start of my coaching career, like I always mention Vinny, because he's the guy who gave a young kid at the time, a really naive, fragile, insecure kid, the confidence to do something he loved. And Vinny gave me that. And, it's because of him that I believe I had confirmation from somebody who was very, very well respected, a great fighter, an eye for talent, someone who knew the game, that he says, Russ Anber's good. That's all I needed, Taylor. That was the thing that gave me the confidence I knew that I could succeed at. So Vinny was the guy. And to this day, when people ask Vinny about me, he says, I'm his discoverer. I discovered Russ Anber. So he takes credit for having discovered me, but I give him the credit for giving me the confidence that I could do this.
Wow, that's absolutely fantastic. What a chance encounter, and what an incredible way to start off.
Yeah.
Out of interest, one of the things that I find quite interesting is, so you say you finished high school and whatnot, do you think that Vinny's kind words and the work you did with him gave you the confidence to pursue it? Because a lot of guys, I feel, you see like other careers, such as, I don't know, some guys want to go into medicine, law, business, or what. So was it a hard decision to fully commit yourself to boxing? How did that generally arise?
It wasn't a hard decision to do. It was financially tough, It was. I was living on boxes of cereal and milk, it certainly was not a trade that was bringing in money. I had to have part-time jobs, and I worked to try to scramble together whatever money I could just so I could pursue the boxing career. And after Vinny left Montreal, I was with Vinny for a few months here, and then he returned back to the States, and I stayed here. And from that point on, I just was at everything connected to boxing. Every amateur show that was there, I was there. Every pro show that was on, I was there, and I was doing something. At the amateur shows, if I didn't have guys fighting on the shows, then I was in charge of the glove table, and I made sure that the next bout got their gloves for the next amateur fight. So I'm around the guys all the time, just talking boxing. For the pro fights, it started to be where I would get an opportunity to work with the fighters who came into town to fight, who were short a corner man or whatever. They needed a corner man. They needed somebody in the corner. I begged for those opportunities, I tell them. And then the promoters started looking at me and say, okay, Russ, you got 2 jobs for you tonight. These 2 guys came in from wherever. They need a corner man. You're in. Okay, perfect. And that's how I started. And then in 1981 is when I opened my own gym. And it was another fluke encounter. I shouldn't say I opened the gym, but where I eventually became the head coach of that gym. There was a boxing club that had been asking me to come over and be an assistant trainer. Now, I had been at the Olympic Club for all these years, for 2 years, 3 years. Now I'd been at the Olympic Club. And, after Vinny left, I kind of didn't have the same opportunities that I had when Vinny was there, because Vinny wasn't there to make sure that I was treated fairly, I didn't get the fair shakes that I probably should have gotten, because I guess some people were envious of my relationship that I had with Vinny. So I was looking to move, and another boxing club called the Saint Laurent Boxing Club, the coach had asked me on numerous occasions, Russ, why don't you come and coach here? Why don't you come coach here? So finally, I made the decision to go over there, and I got there on a Friday, and we announced to all the boxers at the gym that I was going to be the new assistant coach at that gym. And everyone applauded, and they were great. and went to the gym on Monday. And the head coach who was running the gym had tendered his resignation and said that he couldn't do it anymore. He had professional engagements and he was getting married. Blah 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 blah. So over a weekend, I inherited my own boxing club, and that's where the Howard Grant was, Otis Grant, Barrington Francis, Oliver Terrelong, all these fighters that I had, even Ron Donaldson, who went on to win Commonwealth Games gold medal and represent Jamaica at the Olympics. He was there. This all happened in 1981, and that's when I started full-time coaching, and that's why full-time. I say that's when I was coaching. Of course, I still had to have a part-time job to pay the bills, but that's when I had my boxing team, and from that point on, I was fully immersed in it, and that was going to be my business, and that's what I did.
That's absolutely incredible. Just inheriting the gym like that. So on the subject, you mentioned that that Otis Grant and Howard Grant were already there at the gym. So tell me a bit about when they first joined or when you first encountered them, and their progression to. So obviously Howard, if I do believe, got silver at the Amateur World Championships, and Otis would go on to win a WBO championship. So talk to me about their progression as fighters, what you learned in their respective journeys as a coach, and just your relationship with them. A little bit about that, if possible.
Well, listen, I mean, they were, my greatest achievement as far as I'm concerned. Overall, I mean, obviously because they were the first, but the heights that they went to, I don't think I've ever surpassed, neither emotionally or factually. And like I said, I started coaching them when they were respectively 13 and 14 years of age each. They had a couple of amateur fights apiece when I took over. They had started at the Saint Laurent Boxing Club. And as a matter of fact, one of Otis's fights, where I had met Otis prior to actually coaching him, was about a year earlier, if even a year. And I had been working with a fighter at the Olympic Club named Marlon Wright. And Marlon would go on to become a professional fighter and became one of the best referees in the world, and sadly passed away from cancer a couple of years ago. He refereed the Gennady Golovkin-Kell Brook fight in the UK. That was the last fight he did as a referee. But he had done many fights. And I was working with him at the Olympic Club when he fought Otis and beat Otis, actually. And wow. I was in Marlon's corner. So that's when I first met Otis. And then, like I said, I started training both Howard and Otis in March of '81. And Howard would win his first national championship junior in June of that year. And I became the youngest trainer to have a Canadian champion at that time. So I think I had just turned 19 years old, and I had a Canadian champion already. And, Howard and Otis's career, Howard to this day, outside of Lennox Lewis's gold medal at the Olympic Games, Howard is the winningest fighter in Canadian boxing history in the amateur ranks, like in terms of performances around the world. He won a silver, like you said, at the Worlds. He won Commonwealth Game gold medal. He won bronze at the World Junior Championships, where he lost to Angel Espinosa by a decision, who knocked out Meldrick Taylor in one round in the finals. So Howard had a really illustrious career, and anybody who boxed Howard in the amateurs, would tell you that this guy should have been ticketed for greatness. He was one of the most talented fighters, if not the most talented fighter Canada has ever produced in terms of raw talent. A simply great fighter. It's a shame his pro career didn't pan out to what it should have. Although only suffering 2 losses. One was to Billy Schwer and one was to Steve Martin. And Stevie Johnson. I'm sorry, to Stevie Johnson. And he was a talent, an unbelievable talent, and should have handled both those guys actually. But Otis would get silver at the Pan American Games, losing again by decision to Angel Espinosa as well, who I consider maybe the greatest amateur ever. and Howard and Otis are the only two North American fighters to go the distance with Angel Espinosa throughout the prime of his career. Like no American went the distance, nobody went the distance with him except my two guys. So that was kind of special to have them, to be involved with them and train them for such an illustrious amateur career. And then Otis, turning pro. Howard and Otis turned pro at the same time, and Otis going on to capture the WBO middleweight title in Sheffield, England, against Ryan Rhodes, who's a great guy, and at the time was undefeated and was really a hot prospect in the UK. And we went into the Lions Den and won a decision over Ryan Rhodes.
Wow, I think I see why it's such an incredible achievement. Having them from the ground up, grassroots boxing, and then taking them that far right to the top of the mountain. I can see what.
That's something that I'm proudest of the most, and that was instilled to me by a gentleman named John Davenport. And I think people in the UK would remember the name of John Davenport. God bless him, he passed away, but was a dear friend of mine, and another guy, an American trainer who gave me my first chance as a trainer, like with my own boxing club, gave me my first chance and was a mentor to me. And he always said, that the problem in boxing today with trainers is that we see these guys with the big names working with the big name fighters, and they've never developed a fighter in their life. He says, but there's a guy here, Russ, he says, who's a great trainer, and he's going to be someone that's going to go a long way as a trainer, and his name is Emmanuel Stewart. And wow. Sure enough, I emulated myself after Davenport and after Emmanuel Stewart, in that I wanted to be the guy that produced the talent, not just bought the talent. And, that was very important for me. So it was important to having done that with Howard at the amateur level, with Otis as a world champion in the pros, and then later with David Lemieux, who I had since he was 9 years old, who would go on to win a world title as well. So, I'm proud that I've taken, two guys at least from the day one in the gym to a world title, and I don't believe that there's many trainers out there who could make the same claim. Certainly,
I don't think they could.
There's certainly few and far between, and I respect those type of trainers. I respect the guys that have paid their dues in the amateur ranks, that have come through the amateur ranks, that have developed the talent, that did it when their money wasn't involved. Money wasn't an issue. You did it because you wanted to do it, and you had somebody you believed in, and the person you believed in you as well. So I always had great respect for Emmanuel Stewart, not even so much for what he would go on to become famous for, of what he did in the pro ranks, but what he did in the amateur ranks and the fighters that he developed and the gym that he made through his amateur program. And it stands to reason that if you produce solid amateur fighters, you're going to get solid pros. And that's what he did. And John Davenport told me about that. John Davenport did it, and I did it, and I believe in it as well. So, John Davenport was a great mentor of mine and gave me a ton of opportunities. And I'm still involved. John, like I said, trained Lennox Lewis for the start of his entire career in the UK, and I'm the one that introduced Davenport to Lennox Lewis. And Harold Knight was Davenport's fighter, who was a great fighter. His nickname was Shadow. He was USBA champion. He fought for the world title 15 rounds against Rocky Lockridge. Just before 15-round bouts stopped happening, he fought a 15-rounder, and Harold and I are still friends to this day, and I always give the props and respect. And Harold's known me since I was a kid, since I started in boxing, 19 years old, with Davenport, and I always give my props to John Davenport.
Yeah, no, understandable. That's that's incredible. Hearing about Manny Stewart in his early days and Davenport working with Lewis. Out of interest, we mentioned that. Going back a little bit, that you were making coaching observations to Vinnie Curdle. Mm-hmm. Do you think you've always had an eye for the sport, or did those kind of conversations with Curdle, sharpen your analysis and your understanding of it?
I'll answer it to you this way, Taylor. There are some people, certain people get certain gifts, right? Like certain great athletes get great natural gifts of speed, power, talent.
Yeah.
Certain something about me. I think as much as I wanted so badly to be an athlete and I played sports all my life, I never, was a star at any of them. I played them, but was never a star at any of them. And I loved them. I loved playing. I loved the competition, everything. But I think my gift, the gift that I was given by God, if you will, was the ability to coach, the ability to analyze, the ability to transmit information, the ability to make myself understood, the ability to convey a message. All these things, I think, just came natural to me from my earliest memories. Even as a kid, playing hockey or baseball, I always studied and analyzed and knew the game. And as an 11, 12, 13-year-old kid, I was making observations to my baseball coach on what we should do, and we should do this and we should move the players this way because this guy hits this side. And, like I always had that analytical mind of being a coach. It happened that Vinny Curto, through my love of boxing, gave me this opportunity. But I always thought, and I've done it in other sports, just not to the same degree or for the same time, but I always knew that I could be successful as a coach in any sport I would have chosen. So if I had developed a passion, which I had or walked into a place and had the opportunity that Vinny Curto gave me in another sport, primarily baseball or hockey, I think I would have encountered the same success because I just felt that was the gift that I was given. I wasn't given the gift of an athlete, but I was given the gift of coaching, and I knew that my future lay in that somehow.
That's really interesting. Some of the qualities you talked about as being things you excel in. So clarity, communication, being able to articulate yourself. Would you say that level of communication is arguably the most important aspect of being a coach? What would you say are the qualities that really make a coach stand out?
Wow. I think if I had to sum it up in one word, you have to be a great teacher. You have to be able to be a great teacher, someone who understands, and forget about boxing. Let's just say in general, in anything. If you're a snooker coach, if you're a baseball coach, hockey coach, soccer coach, whatever it is, teaching someone the skills to excel in these games, in those games, to me is the most important thing. And there's not a lot of people who do it well. There's a lot of people who do it, but there's not a lot who do it well. It takes a special talent for somebody to be able to do that because, you have to find a way of taking whatever knowledge you have and of the sport or of the technique or whatever's involved, and now finding a way to convey what makes that work to various different people, in which you might have to find 5 different ways for 5 different people to explain how to do that and to find out what they're having difficulty with and identify it so you can fix that problem to get to the end result. And I know that seems very complex and crazy, and I'm trying to, verbalize this as best as I can. But to me, all of this comes down to being a great teacher, being able to take somebody who didn't know how to do something and show them how to do it and perfect it and perfect it and perfect it until they got it right and were able to execute it flawlessly. I think that's probably the most important thing you can be about being a coach. But again, in boxing, your coaching goes far beyond that, because then you get involved with corner work and working the corner and motivation, and all these things, of course, also come into play. Like, there are some great cornermen out there who are outstanding motivators. And Angelo Dundee, who is a friend of mine, I never considered Angelo, a great teacher, but he was a great eye for talent. He had a great eye for the game. He was an outstanding cornerman, a great motivator, said the right things right at the right time to the talent he had with him. And that always, Angelo, I always admired him for doing that. And I idolized Angelo and the way he worked in the corner and the way he handled the corner. You could just see that the way he worked the corner, the way he stood there, the way he got in the ring, the way he got out of the ring. All these factors are important for being a boxing coach. But he wasn't like a Ray Arcel or an Eddie Futch type trainer. He wasn't that kind of a teacher. He was a different kind, but he still had certain qualities about him that made him successful. So when you take in those factors along with being a great teacher, I think you end up with great coaching talent.
One thing that you did mention there, which is something that I noted, was you talk about being a great teacher, but kind of customizing it to different people. You know, obviously with different personalities and whatnot. So I don't know necessarily about how some of the guys are, but for example, Usyk. From what I've seen, he likes to be have some fun in training camp, be a little more laid back and jokey at times. So how do you find doing that? Actually being able to communicate that message, knowing which buttons to press. You know, now we have to be serious, and keeping a fighter kind of, you know, in optimal possible shape and discipline, just knowing what buttons to press, so to speak.
Well, let me tell you something that is a motto that we use for our boxing gyms, and I've used my whole life, but we use them now for our rival boxing gyms. And it's funny you asked that because you mentioned two key words in this, and this sums it up perfectly. Um, Happiness is not the enemy of fun, and discipline is. I'm sorry. Let me rephrase that. Oh shit! Now I forgot it. Hang on. You caught me
Discipline?
off guard with no. It's not that. Discipline is not the enemy of happiness. Discipline is not the enemy of happiness. Oh boy, I have to look this up now. I'm going to have to get back to you on this because I had it on the tip of my tongue and I just lost it when you said that about Usyk, and I was going to.
Yeah, no problem at all. Yeah, no, I know how
Oh,
annoying.
learning. This is it. Learning is not the enemy of fun, and happiness is not the enemy of and discipline is not the enemy of happiness. Learning is not the enemy of fun, and discipline is not the enemy of happiness. So those models are something that I've lived by, and this is the first boy. I must be really going stir crazy being in quarantine, but I can't believe after 40 years I've forgotten those. But I got it back, so that's just an old age moment right there. But that is exactly what I have preached my whole life in boxing, and I like to think that when I come into a camp, when I come into a gym working with a certain fighter, I like that when I walk in, I feel, especially with my most sincere guys, I feel that there's a look of happiness on their face when I get there because I come there with energy and what's up, guys? What's happening? And they're happy to see me, and we can have fun and still work hard. And Usyk is a prime example of that, as is Lomachenko. Like Loma will have a little bit more mood swings than Usyk will have, but for me, the chemistry, the DNA between the two of us is just fantastic because even though he's working hard, we can still have fun. And this was something that I stressed when I was with Jean Pascal and he was getting ready to fight Lucian Bute, and we were in camp, and I did numerous interviews about this and said the reason everything is going so well in camp for us now is because Jean is happy. He wakes up in the morning, his weight is on, he's happy. He can eat, he's happy. We go to the gym, he trains well, he's happy. And in any walk of life, I don't care what business you're in, what trade you do, if you're happy doing that, you will have success. You will be good at it. If you're a waitress in a restaurant and you're happy, you're going to be the best waitress in that restaurant. If in any walk of life, if you're miserable at what you're doing, that is going to end up showing in your work. It's very, very rare the people that do not enjoy and have fun and look forward to doing what they do and have success at it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, it's fantastic that you have that relationship with those fighters, and you're able to make them happy as well as achieving results. Putting the work in. You mentioned Lomachenko and Usyk. How actually did you first meet these guys, the Ukrainians?
Well, good question. Good question, Taylor. My first encounter with Usyk, I'm sorry, with Lomachenko was the Olympic Games in China, where I was there as the broadcaster with the CBC, which would be the equivalent of your BBC, and I had been a color commentator and analyst for the network since the 1988 was my first Olympic Games, where I'd been the voice of boxing, and I covered all the Olympic coverage. So I first got to see Lomachenko after knowing about him prior to the Olympics, but never having seen him. I got to see him at the Olympic Games, and he was my pick as most outstanding boxer. And sure enough, that's who they gave it to. And no doubt about it, he was without a doubt the prime talent there. Then, of course, got to cover him again in London, where this was just basically his repeat performance, and there wasn't going to be anybody that was really going to touch him in London. Then he turned pro. He had 3 professional fights, and in each one of those fights, he used 3 different brands of gloves and suffered hand injuries each time. And he noted to his manager, he says, "We have to solve this problem." He says, "I can't keep hurting myself like this." At the same time, Sergey Kovalev was getting set to come to Montreal and fight Jean Pascal for the first time. And his manager was the same manager, which was Egis Klimas. And Egis was in touch with a friend of mine who used to work for me at Rival, and said, we're coming to Montreal, and mentioned to my friend that, Loma's having problems with his hands. And so my friend said, well, you should give Russ Anber a try. So on the eve of the fight with Kovalev and Jean Pascal, I got a phone call from Egis introducing himself and saying he had Lomachenko here, and that I came recommended, that I was a good hand rapper, and could I come down to the hotel and rap Lomachenko and meet him and give it a try and see if he likes it. And I told him, well, unfortunately, I couldn't go to the hotel. I said, because I'm heading over to the Bell Center, very early. So if you'd like, please, can you bring Vasily to the Bell Center, bring him to the dressing room, and I'll be more than happy to wrap him there. And Jean won't be arriving until later. So if you don't mind doing that, let's do that. So he did. So he brought Vasily to the dressing room, and I was the only one in there. The Pascal team hadn't yet arrived. It was early. It was like about 4:00 in the afternoon. So Jean was the main event. He wasn't there yet. So we brought him in there. I sat Vasily in the chair. I wrapped his hands. I had him try on our gloves, and he said he liked them. They brought me in for his next fight, and I've been with him ever since. So I've been with him for literally his entire pro career, except for his first 3 fights. And he had wore Rival gloves for basically his whole career up until he got an endorsement deal where they were paying him to wear another brand, but that's another story. But
yeah. I've always seen him basically wear Rival, except I think I saw him once in Venom gloves.
Venom paid him to wear gloves, and they paid a ridiculous amount of money, and that's not our policy at Rival to do that, So
yeah.
I understand his situation. It was an opportunity for his management to get equipment and money for their other fighters, which is something I couldn't do for them. But which is fine, no problem. I know how much he loves our stuff. I know what he likes about it, and I know that he wore it during a time when we were able to provide the service that he needed from us. And he wore it without us paying. He wore it because he loved it, and I know he still does. So I'm fine with that. I understand it's the boxing business. Money talks, and people have to take that. No problem. But so that's how I got the job working with Vasily, and still stayed on even after he switched gloves, and still stayed on, and then his cut man, and take care of him in the corner, and I still wrap his hands. So and I'm proud of that.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting way of meeting it. I've always wondered, how a Canadian ends up meeting the Lomachenko, Anatoly, and Vasily, as well as Usyk. One thing that is interesting, and it's quite difficult to glean information about him. As far as I'm aware, he's a very private man, who keeps himself to himself. But in terms of Anatoly Lomachenko, Vasily's father. What have you generally learnt under him as a coach? What are your thoughts about him as a coach, and some of his methods?
Yeah, you know what? I thought that after being in the game for 40 years, I had seen it all. And then just when you think you've seen it all, you realize that you haven't, And what I saw from this guy is a dedicated guy, dedicated to his son, but a student of the game. This guy doesn't do things by luck. This guy doesn't do things by feeling. This guy does things by a calculated surgical approach. Everything for him is counted, is reasoned, is scientific. There is a reason and for everything they do. Every bit of the training is documented, photographed, videotaped, counted, recounted, everything, analyzed, you name it. Everything about his structure is to a level of professionalism that I cannot say I have ever seen before, and for that matter, have seen since. This guy is at another level of bringing boxing coaching, breaking it down to the science that it is about everything, not just about the technique, not just about a strategy, not just about you being a cheerleader, about everything. Diet, psychological approach, physical conditioning, swimming, everything you could imagine. This guy does for a reason and does it better than anybody I've ever seen.
It's really interesting because he's one of the figures in boxing that really interests me because, as I said, seemingly a very private man. I've never really seen him in interviews or whatnot, but he's someone who, to my knowledge, only had a somewhat limited background in boxing himself. But he's come in and he's introduced some techniques which are completely revolutionary. I mean, I've never heard of guys in boxing talk about, ballet classes to improve footwork or some of the stuff he does. Lomachenko does those quick fire reaction things on a board. I don't know how to. So yeah, it's really interesting to hear about how he revolutionizes the sport and that you've never seen anything like it.
I never, and a lot of the stuff that he does comes from the old Soviet system of training athletes in any sport, doesn't matter what it is, the whole science behind it. And I think the Western world needs to learn more of that. I think that's our weakness. I think the Cubans, as far as boxing goes, I think the Cubans had for numerous years had found that perfect combination of a pro style with a Soviet regimented system that that reaped massive rewards, and made them the greatest fighting machine in the world, for years at Olympic and world amateur level. They were fantastic, and a lot of what Anatoly uses comes from that, from that former Soviet system where they believe that coaching, which the one thing about, I got to say, as compared to the Western world, in the West, we treat coaching as almost like a volunteer service, hey, you want to sign up and be a volunteer and coach the kids team? Or no, they treat coaching as a trade, as a job, as a profession. You go to school, you say, what do you want to be? I want to be a coach. Well, they teach you how to be a coach, and you're taught that. I don't know what it is like in England, but I know in North America, there's no university you go to that says, I want to get a master's degree in coaching. I don't know that exists, and it's a shame because they teach you what real coaching is, what real teaching is, what real studying is, and there's a science behind it. So Anatoly exploits that, uses it, and like I said, does it better than anybody I've ever seen do it before.
No, I've actually been told from a contact of mine who writes for the Ring in Ukraine, Petter. There's a story that he told me about Usyk. And I was wondering, if you know anything about this, if you can confirm it's true, and if it is, I have a follow-up question for it. So the story goes that Usyk was in preparation for the Gassiev fight, and he was in camp with Anatoly, and he started experiencing physical shakes. And he was shaking involuntarily, shaking. And he goes to Anatoly. He goes, right, I'm shaking. What is this? And Anatoly says, good. That means you're on the right path. He said, Vasily went through the same things. And this means that you have to keep going in order to unlock that next level. I don't know if you're familiar with this story.
I was in camp for that fight. I was in camp I was in there for the entire duration of that camp. Now, obviously, they would be speaking in Russian, so there could have been something that was said. I swear to you, Taylor, I have no idea what you're talking about. If it happened, I do not know about it. I'm sorry. I have no clue that happened. I know what he did in training. I was there for every session of training. I was there for the entire camp. So I'm sorry. I don't know what that is or what that person heard or said, or I have no idea.
Yeah, no problem at all. Well, it puts that urban myth to bed at least. On the subject though, of that Gassiev camp, I mean, it kind of leads into my next question anyway. About Usyk, it puts in arguably the finest performance of his professional career, an absolute masterclass. For me, one of the defining masterclasses of the decade, up there with Rigondeaux beating Donaire and Mayweather schooling Canelo. And it's really interesting.
What about Lomachenko schooling Rigondeaux?
Yeah, no, I would probably say, in my opinion, I think that him schooling Rigondeaux, not so much about size as some people like to make out, but I think that the stylistic dynamic of the fight, the southpaw versus southpaw dynamic, is something that limits Rigondeaux somewhat because he likes to use his jab, his pouring jab, in order to establish everything, and I feel like Lomachenko was able to take that way, and a lot of what it was what Lomachenko did. And I do think that's a very impressive performance. I mean, I'd put it up there as one of his best wins. Personally, I think the finest win I've seen from Lomachenko, in my opinion, is against Nicholas Walters.
Absolutely.
I watched the Walters performance, and I think Walters is an incredibly underrated technician. The way he just absolutely dominated was truly impressive.
Yeah, it certainly was.
So I believe we are currently running out of time.
You can finish your question. You were saying that Gassiev and Usyk fight was one of, you were listing the dominant performances, and then you wanted to go on something, and I rudely cut you off. So.
Oh, no problem at all. No problem at all. Out of interest, would you be? No, I'll ask that after. We're talking about the Gassiev preparation and whatnot, and Usyk looking like he's just on a completely different mental plane to a very good fighter in Gassiev that night. So one of my questions was, this is regards to you and Anatoly. When you're doing conditioning for Usyk, for Lomachenko, and they both look like they have absolutely supreme engines, how do you find the balance between getting them as prepared psychologically, physically, really working them as hard as you can, but not overworking them? You hear guys like Sergey Kovalev who say, I overtrained for this fight. Do you think overtraining is a myth, or how do you find that balance?
I think that's a good question. Okay, so let's start with the latter first. Do I think overtraining is a myth? Yes, I do, because when someone says that, it's never based on any science. It's never based on account to say, you're fatigued, you've done something. I often hear people say that, and it's a very broad statement. I was overtrained. I mean, what these guys, especially after working with Usyk and Lomachenko, I don't believe in overtrained anymore, because these guys train like unbelievably. Like there's no such thing as overtrained. You get your body ready for that, and you rest like you're supposed to rest. There's no such thing as overtrained. So I'm not sure that I believe that. Now, you could be doing things that might be detrimental to you that you quantify as being overtrained. I don't know, you have a problem with your knees and you continue to put impact on them and hurt your knees, and then in the fight, they just hurt you and you can't move the way you want to, blah 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 blah. Yeah, that could be that. If you want to say that's overtraining, that's just because there's something wrong and you've injured it and hurt it, then you didn't take care of it. But when you're training and you're performing and you have your schedule made out about what you're going to do, plus the rest time that you're going to have in the week leading up to the fight, I have a difficult time accepting now, after seeing what they do, as overtraining, because these two guys train more in an 8-week training camp than I see fighters training in a year. So yes, I do believe that might be a fabricated statement when people say they overtrain. As far as finding the right balance, I would be remiss in answering that question for you, because that really is something that falls into Anatoly's area of expertise. He puts the program together. I've never pretended to be a trainer or a coach that understood the science of conditioning. I do things the way I've always learned to do them, the way I was taught to do them. I don't have a professional education in this, so I don't profess to make any statements regarding that, of what's good or not. My area of expertise is in technique, it's in delivery, it's in boxing style, it's in all this, how to deliver punches, those kind of things. That's my area of expertise, and that's what I think I contributed the most with Usyk when I worked with him. And I think if I had to pick the two fights in which I thought I made the biggest difference in, was the Tony Bellew fight and the Michael Hunter fight. And I won't say what they are, but there are things in there that are specifically, and the Gassiev fight, the Gassiev fight, are things specifically that we worked on and that we wanted him to do, that he did. And that I feel happy about.
Thank you for listening to the Superfly Boxing Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, and absolutely wonderful speaking to Russ. Hopefully we have him on again soon for part 2. Plenty of time to keep picking his brains, talking about subjects such as Lomachenko, Usyk, rival boxing gloves, and some of his thoughts over boxing across the years. If you liked this video, please like and share it, and please check out our Patreon. It's an absolutely fantastic community. Full of really enthusiastic boxing minds, MMA minds, kickboxing minds, you name it. That's patreon.com/fightsite. Thank you very much, and we hope to see you soon.